We expect a lot from first responders, police officers, paramedics, firefighters, and other public safety personnel are tasked with keeping us safe. But they're often the first on the scene to some pretty traumatic events, and that can take its toll. When you add grueling shift work, poor sleep, mental health stigma, our first responders are under unimaginable stress. I'm Nicole Huck, and today on Blue Sky, we're going to hear firsthand from firefighters, police officers, paramedics, and search and rescue workers. We'll also hear from people who provide mental health supports to these first responders. And we want to hear from you. If you have experience working as a first responder, what toll did it take on your mental health, and what helped you cope with the stress? You can call 1-800-716-2221, or you can email bluesky@cbc.ca. Well, my studio is full of people who are going to help us understand the pressures that first responders face and the impact it can take on mental health. Shaylee Spencer is a former paramedic, and she is now a clinical social worker. Shaylee is with the Canadian Institute for Public Safety Research and Treatment, and that group provides mental health resources for first responders. Shaylee, welcome to Blue Sky.
Thanks for having me here.
And sitting beside her is her husband, Sam Gersmar. He has 11 years of service with the RCMP and now trains new recruits. Corporal Gersmar, welcome to Blue Sky.
Thanks for having me today.
Thanks for being here. And Todd Fry was a frontline firefighter in Regina for almost 20 years. He's currently an emergency manager. Todd, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
So I think that many people would put first responders up there on that list when they're thinking about stressful jobs. But what do you think people don't fully understand about your job? Todd, let's start with you.
Sometimes, you go on a call, you come back after seeing someone's worst day, and you don't always have that time to reflect on what you experienced. And then that starts to compound call after call. And if you don't do anything to sort of release or empty your bucket, I guess, then it builds up, and before you know it, it starts affecting your own mental health and affecting the way you respond to the calls that you go to.
You were in it for a long time.
Yes.
20 years is a long time.
17.
17
going
years?
On
Okay.
18, but yeah.
Still a long time.
Yep.
Are there days that you can't get out of your head?
I don't have, some people talk about one specific call. Mine's more of, a combination of calls. There are certain calls that I can remember, but for the most part, it was just a combination of the multiple calls that I went on. And then, personal life also. I had a daughter who has epilepsy. I had a friend, one of my best friends, complete suicide in 2016. So that all sort of compounds and adds to it.
And did you feel, we often hear about firefighters as a brotherhood, or I don't want to just say brotherhood because there's female firefighters
sisterhood
as well.
too.
Sisterhood. But do you feel like over the years, has the support that's been available to you changed, or have you always kind of made time to be able to talk to your colleagues about what you're experiencing?
So I got on in 2008. There was a critical incident stress management team in 2008, but mental health wasn't really talked about around, we always say, the kitchen table. I remember back in the day it was, you went on a bad call. Oh, well, we'll go out for drinks after. We'll spin the top off a 40 and the session will be done when the bottle is done, right? But over the years, partnering with people like SIPCERT, PSPNet, and our own department, we've put mental health at the forefront, and we've started finding programs that we can give to our members so that we do talk about mental health. I talk to our recruits, about mental health when they get on, and I was very surprised. A couple recruit classes ago, one of the recruits came up to me at the end and said, "Hey, I'm moving here from a small town. I have a psychologist that I see. Could you recommend a psychologist here in town?" I was blown away. I mean, that's not something that in 2008, as a new recruit, I would have ever went up and talked to one of my training officers about. So I think we're definitely headed in the right direction.
Sam, I'll go to you next. What do you think that people don't understand about the toll that your job can take?
I 100% agree with Todd, and just adding to that is that at the end of the day, even though that uniform comes off, what we dealt with throughout that day still follows us home. And sometimes when you're dealing with, we use OSI, so operational stress injuries, or to the extreme
Can you
PTSD.
say that acronym again?
OSI, operational stress injury. It's a start before your diagnosis of PTSD. So just that compiling of all those calls and that, like Todd, was saying, where you're just compiling, right? Where you're just from one to another to another to another. So you don't necessarily have that time to deal with what you dealt with and what you saw, right? As where the average individual sees maybe 4 major incidents potentially throughout their lives, we see that probably in a shift or the first 3 hours of shift, right? Depending upon where you're located and working. So I think the fact when you go in and you are seeing people at that worst point in their life, you kind of have to put it on the shelf for now to go to that next call so that you're switched on so you can be at the peak or the best that you can be, right? And give that next person the same level of service that you gave to that person from the start of shift to the end. And I think the big piece of that is because you're so switched on during your shift, at the end of shift, when you go home, you're just exhausted physically and mentally. And that starts creating effects at home, right? Both relationships, friends, your partner, right? Even with your kids, because sometimes you need that, 10, 20, whatever amount of time when you get home of just nothing to try and deal with what those traumas were that you were a part of during that day.
I imagine you are bringing stuff home, though. And again, when you're going home, you're going to somebody who has worked as a paramedic and somebody who kind of understands some of that stress. Not everybody has a spouse in that same situation, but do you have to rein yourself in at all when you're coming home? How intentional are you about making time to have that conversation and then also having boundaries?
Actually, I'm glad you ended with that because boundaries is actually something I was going to bring up, right? Something that Shaylee and I have, especially when I was doing general duty stuff in some of the places that I worked, you drain your partner, whether they have that experience in that or not, in regards to working and counseling somebody that has or is a first responder. You have to set that boundary to, hey, you know what, maybe 10, 20 minutes after you get home, you can vent whatever it is that's bugging you. But after that, you got to try and table that. Not saying that trauma or what you're dealing with isn't important, but you got to switch your brain off from work and come back to your life because you'll get consumed. I personally was after 5 years of service in that because of all the stuff that I had dealt with. It consumed me and I went into a really dark place. But there was other people, coworkers in that, Shaylee, and other resources that I got connected with that kind of brought me out of that dark space.
When you were in that place, what did that look like for you?
It kind of just feels like it's never ending, right? It's like, man, this is a job that I got into. You kind of start rethinking your life choices and like, is this what I want to do for the rest of my career? There's got to be something better. And I got connected with a group called SOCI. So it's Support of Operational Stress Injuries. It's connected with the RCMP. They are a group. I was actually a volunteer for a very long time with them. And basically you go and you connect with these individuals and that, and if they deem that it's more than just needing to sit and talk to somebody that has that understanding, they get you connected with resources that are within your province.
I think it's probably helpful actually having it referred to as an injury, an operational stress injury is probably a word that might be new to some of our listeners today, but being able to actually point to something and say this is a thing is probably quite helpful. Sheila, you've been nodding along listening to Sam. What were you thinking?
I think along the aspect of boundaries that he had talked about, one of the things as a support I feel like maybe I had done wrong initially was feel like I could be the everything for that individual. I wanted to be that person that they talked to, came to, offered that support to, but as indicated, you get burnt out very quickly. And then working in the mental health field, I just felt like I was working all of the time. So I feel like setting those boundaries was the best thing that I could have done for us, and saying, I'm here for you for this period of time, but I think reaching out and getting a different aspect, different supports is going to be the best thing for us. We really look at it as in like an overwhelm, that body-based piece, so that we have communication and language around that. And it is difficult as a spouse to allow that time when somebody comes home. They need to downgrade, work on that dysregulation. But you've been at home doing all the things all day long, and so you just really, really want that connection. But just kind of learning boundaries on your partner's side, boundaries on yours, and we're working within that aspect.
Is there much conversation about that, about how to support family members of first responders or, paramedics or police officers or firefighters? Because it's a role that is a very important role, that home support. Or friendship, or whomever it is that's offering that support. But probably there isn't a playbook for people in terms of what they're supposed to do. If you had to offer a few tips for the people listening, because right now there's people listening who are like, maybe I haven't been offering the right support. What should they do?
Yeah, I think that the support for families is growing. It's definitely a pillar that is attempting to be addressed right now. And it's so different. Everybody comes with different aspects of their family. I think about kind of like that solo independent regulation, taking care of yourself, looking at what you need, and then reaching out to somebody that you're supporting to support them in the way that they feel is best.
How do you feel like your own personal experience as a paramedic has changed the way that you do your job when you're counseling others?
As a mental health practitioner, I think it has allowed me to understand the demands, the stigma, the relationship, how you feel, of like the back-to-back pieces just in that body, the mindset, the fog, all of those. So I think when I come to work with people, I understand that. But then also people come with their own experiences, like their own story before they even started the career, how that's impacting them while they're in it, their supports and resources.
I want to talk about something, Sam, you'd kind of alluded to. I think what the word might be is empathy fatigue. You were saying, how do I make sure that the people at the end of the shift get the same version of me as the people at the start of the shift, or maybe the start of your career, even though you've been in it for 17 years. I can't imagine how you stay fresh and not have, all of the stresses of the years and all the things, all that baggage with you. But let's talk about empathy fatigue. How does it affect you? And maybe I'll start with you, Todd.
Excuse me. I think, especially with the opioid crisis, I seen that there was a lot of empathy fatigue. And I was working on some mental health stuff at the time through CIPCERT. So I started talking to one of the counselors at CIPCERT, and she said, think of that person as maybe that person was a pro athlete. And then I thought, you know what? That could have been me. I had a back injury in 2013. 2013, I had a back injury. So where I blew a disc out, I was in massive amounts of pain. So luckily, I didn't have to take any painkillers until surgery, but that could have been me. We all work in very physically demanding jobs. It could be a paramedic. It could be a police officer, any PSP. They suffer an injury. Now they've got addicted to opioids or painkillers, right? So I think just sort of reframing when you go to these overdose after overdose after overdose. You know what? That person didn't wake up today and decide that they wanted to be addicted to opioids. They didn't want this to be their 10th overdose. So just sort of reframing it in your mind that, you know what, this is a human being that was living life and something happened. So yeah, we need to to be empathetic and just sort of have that in the back of our mind when we attend these calls.
Sam?
I think part of that empathy fatigue is also making sure that we're looking after ourselves. For myself, when I was general duty, it was really hard. Exercise is a huge thing for me. So finding that time of what makes you happy, whether it be, like I said, exercising or going on camping trips or going on a vacation once a year or whatever it is, but recharging your own battery, right? Because, when you're going to call, and it's like maybe different person, similar situation, it's just kind of becomes, and I don't mean this in a rude way, but it almost becomes a recording, right? Because you go, okay, I have to get A to Z done, right? And it just becomes a bit of a systematic thing, and it's not intentional, and it's not taking a situation lesser than what it is. It's just, okay, here we go. What do I need to do, right? And switching that kind of human piece off, right? And you put that uniform in the forefront, and then it goes back to, that going home with that empathy fatigue again, right? And I strip the uniform off and I'm back to myself, but I still have that attachment. So I think a big piece of that is really finding what recharges your own battery and realizing, which is hard, which is where coworkers really need to step up and be like, hey man, are you okay? And then, going, you know what, I have holidays, let's take those holidays. Let's go and do something, completely strip what I'm doing for work and focus on myself, my family, or whatever your situation is for yourself.
Have you ever done that? Kind of checked in on a colleague, noticed that maybe they needed a little extra attention and checked in on them?
I have, yes.
And what were the flags for you?
For me, so one of the coworkers I was really, really close with, I just noticed like their go-getting kind of like attitude in regards to call was just kind of like they were taking less and less. They were kind of avoiding certain calls, and they were kind of isolating themselves. Not kind of, they were very much isolating themselves, right? So you kind of open that door with a coffee or, hey, you want to grab lunch or something like that, right? And you kind of make it an inadvertent check-in to see actually how they're doing, right? Make it like a normal kind of thing. And I've done that with quite a few, especially because I was volunteering with SOCI, and that I had a large group of people that I would do check-ins in, and some that were just really good friends.
And then what's the next step? You're like, okay, I've noticed this. You've given them a chance to maybe talk about it, but what's the next step so that they can... I don't know, like you can't just go on vacation probably whenever you're feeling like that. So what do you do when you have to show up the next shift?
That's a good question, and that is a struggle. One thing, a supervisor of mine, before I left my last post, he used to do check-ins with me, and you have to kind of be careful with it because even though every organization's come a long way in regards to mental health, I think everybody knows there's always work to be done no matter how great things are. And, kind of, hey, have you talked to somebody? Have you thought about talking to somebody in that, right? And trying to potentially plant that idea of going to get outside resources, right? Which is a really tough conversation to have with somebody because that puts you in a tough situation when you realize somebody's not in a good space, right? So that's a really tough question to answer because there's so many different avenues and there's no good one per se, but no bad one. But I think really opening up and making them comfortable and know that there's no shame in asking for additional assistance. Going back to my supervisor that I had, that's what he did for me was like, hey, Sam, have you talked to anybody? Have you seen a counselor? There's no shame in going to see one every 6 months going, hey, yeah, you know what, that really helped me today. I needed that. I'm good now. Or maybe I really need to go see somebody every, month or whatever the case is. And just really going back to that empathy and looking into them and putting yourself in their shoes and going, hey, is this maybe something you need? Or, hey, maybe grabbing a coffee in that during shift for 5 minutes or whatever the time frame you have, just to talk about that.
Yeah. Maybe normalizing that it's okay to not be okay. and creating a plan to address whatever symptoms people are having, because there's sleep, irritability, a lot of those things can come up for people. So, validating that. But then what is our plan? And I think a lot of the research out there right now is making it known that first responders are going to experience these things in their careers. So let's create a plan preventatively throughout your career. And how are you going to transition? What does that look like for you?
And I think as a peer supporter, that's a big thing. If you're going to say, hey, how are you doing? Be ready for that answer to be, I'm not doing good. Mm-hmm. And then have a plan of, okay, well, have you decided to try this, or this? Here are the resources that we have, so that you're not caught off guard and like, oh, I wasn't expecting that. Now what?
I'm Nicole Huck. You're listening to Blue Sky on CBC Radio, and today we're talking to first responders about the toll that their jobs can take on their mental health. We're also hearing about coping strategies and support available for people in Saskatchewan who work these jobs. So if you want to join this conversation, if you have experience working as a first responder, we can talk about what toll it took on your health, but also how you coped with that stress. You can call 1-800-716-2221, or you can email bluesky@cbc.ca. There's a couple of people standing by who've been listening to the show so far, and I want to bring them in right now. Our next guest has been an EMS paramedic for 20 years. Alice Gabriel trains her peers on suicide awareness and prevention. She talks about the higher levels of burnouts for paramedics because of heavy call volumes, workplace violence, and little to no downtime during long shifts. For more on what her shift looks like, Alice is on the line now. Alice, welcome to Blue Sky.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me.
Thanks for being here. And then we have one other person. Our second guest is a media liaison with Search and Rescue Saskatchewan Association of Volunteers. And as a longtime volunteer, Dustin Brers has developed a mental health support program for Search and Rescue. He was overseeing last year's major evacuations in Manitoba because of the forest fires. And he's on the line now. Dustin, welcome to Blue Sky.
Happy to be here.
Alice, I want to start with you. What does your day-to-day look like as a paramedic?
Well, that could be a multitude of things depending on what the day brings us. On the street, on frontline, we all show up, and whatever we get dispatched out to, we may head out to something as a fall lift assist. It could be anything from a child having some type of breathing respiratory distress. We can go to a cardiac arrest. We're most definitely part of the overdose epidemic that's going on here in the city. And then that can lead also into the aspects of the mental health that's in the public as well. From the other aspect too, besides the frontline aspect, I am in a position now where I am dealing firsthand with the paramedics that are across the province, along with the medical first responders that are also assisting us, and the exponential rise in that. Well, it's been spoken about already here, the occupational stress injuries, the burnout, the PTSI.
What do you attribute that rise to?
There are a number of things that are attributing to that. Our population is increasing significantly. So with that comes higher call volumes, comes with higher demands, more medical emergencies that we may not have seen, as Todd was referring to years back ago when we first started. I also was 2006. But we've seen that rise in what those emergencies are bringing us. So we're trying to keep up with that. But not only that, it's also the supports and the resources available to us. Unfortunately, and it's not on a lack from an intended lack of those resources, but people don't know where to reach out to. But not only that, we're not always going to reach out to it. This is I guess that stigma that we've been talking about, the old boys club, as we will also refer to, it's starting to go away. It's great. We're all talking more, but it's still present. It's still there. And so this is what we're bringing that awareness to, and we're trying to help reduce that so that a person is not afraid to reach out.
Dustin, what about you? What does kind of your day-to-day work look like?
Well, search and rescue in the province is entirely volunteer, or at least our organization is. So my day to day is in the construction industry, and that's my day job. And what happens is if someone goes missing in the province, the authorities such as the RCMP or city police forces or others will call us out, and we will leave our day jobs and leave our family and travel across the province to search for someone's loved one in an organized professional capacity. So it's with search and rescue, it's the good-hearted volunteers across the province that do not do emergency services, day to day. They might work at a daycare, they might work at a construction company, they all different walks of life, and they get thrust into these situations where you'll perhaps find someone deceased, or you may not find them, or you have a good outcome and you find someone alive and bring them back to their families. So it is a range of emotions for some of our volunteers.
And is that built into the training? The what happens after one of these events, doesn't turn out how you'd hoped?
Absolutely. Our searchers are trained to CSA standards, and we run through a lengthy program with them that does include some mental health components to it, especially on how to access the mental health resources available in the province. And, the other folks on this show have talked about the various programs available, and they're also available to our volunteers and their families as well. So it's part of our training. And you mentioned in my bio about the wildfires in other parts of Canada. We responded a few times to different areas, Newfoundland, Manitoba this past summer. And on those teams, we actually have mental health supports built right into the team, and they are not for the general public or other people in the emergency. They're strictly for our team, and they're not assigned any other duties than to do mental health support during the deployment. So that's a huge step forward for, like I said, volunteers, folks that don't get paid to do this. They're just doing it out of the goodness of their heart, and it's available to them and their families both during and after.
I'm curious about turnover from both of you. I know paramedics, we often hear that you could never get enough paramedics. They're, run off their feet. And from hospitals are talking about it, the overdose crisis talking about it. What is the turnover like for paramedics, and how much do you attribute to just the stresses of the job?
The turnover is quite exponential. We also have to look to that generationally. We're looking at a turnover that comes naturally in any type of profession, right? You have individuals that are retiring and coming on. Right now, though, we are seeing less and less of that prolonged career in EMS. So we incidentally, only a few years ago, have retired from the street paramedics. And that is extremely rare, which shows the youthness of the we're a newer profession, right? But it's the burnout, the toll physically, mentally on people's bodies, right? It is the never getting a break, not getting a lunch, all those different things, because it is how the system is. And we have a huge amount of younger individuals that have come into the profession, but now we're looking at life expectancy of that career maybe being 5 years, and then they're moving on to something else. It comes with the demands, and again, as you said, the lack of individuals that are available to even supply the amount of trucks that are available. And that's not specifically due to anybody per se. That's just the way the system is currently. And so they're getting burnt out. There's not the time to recuperate from each call, and so they're learning, this is a little harder on me than I thought it would be.
So when do you even get help? Like I'm just so curious if you're just feeling like, I'm going to work, I'm coming home, I'm trying to do something with my family, I'm trying to go to the gym. When are you even supposed to build in this time to see a counselor? And do counselors work in evenings? Like, are you trying to squeeze it in during a shift? Are employers giving you time to see a counselor during a shift? I'm curious. Anybody who... Just start talking, Todd.
I think that's a great question.
PSP Net is great because you can...
Can you say what that is?
PSP Net public...
Public
PSP
service personnel.
Yeah, but it is a therapy program that is therapist guided, offered online. So it's a really good option because you get the content that you're able to work through, and then you connect with a therapist when it works for you. So it's flexible. They meet you where you're at. It's a great program to build insight. And as you were speaking, that's the one thing that came to my mind is that a lot of the symptoms that first responders or public safety personnel will start to identify, maybe it's sleep. Well, we can normalize that because of course sleep is impacted by shift work, or I'm feeling agitated. Of course you are because of the long hours. So I think that being able to build insight or even acknowledgement of where we're at is really important and kind of that first step. PSPNet is super great for that. They offer courses on PTSD, well-being, and sleep. And so that's a great start when people are like, well, where do I go?
Yeah, PSPNet, like I said, that's an online thing. I could have done that sitting at the fire hall in between calls. I'm sure my employer would be fine with us if we had to go to an appointment during shift, and as long as manpower allowed it, there wouldn't be a problem. Thing is, with stigma, not a lot of people are putting their hand up saying, I'm going to book a counseling session during my shift. That's the only thing.
You've started talking publicly about this.
Yeah.
I mean, you're on the radio. Y'all are on the radio, in case you didn't know. So people are going to know that there's been times where you felt like you needed to seek help. For you, Todd, what was going on in your life where you were like, I need some additional supports right now?
Well, it was more my body telling me. I ended up in the emergency room twice on separate occasions thinking I was having a heart attack. And the second time, the doctor in the emergency room was like, you're young, you're relatively in good shape. This sounds to me more like maybe anxiety, panic, something like that.
What did that feel like for you? Can you describe the symptoms that you were having?
I was hot. I was flushed. My heart was racing. I was having chest pain. There was some shortness of breath, and just that, I don't know, feeling of, oh my gosh, am I having a heart attack? Like, I'm way too young. I've got a wife. I've got 3 kids. So I mean that just all adds to the anxiety. So yeah, it was.
And what happened? You went to the emergency?
I went to the emergency both times. They did all the tests, everything. And like I said, you're healthy. There's nothing cardiac at all. So the second time when the emergency room doc said, I think, this sounds like anxiety or panic, I decided, you know what? Then and there, okay, I need to phone. We have an employee family assistance program. I called a couple days later and scheduled my first appointment and went in there and kind of spilt my guts. And,
how did that feel?
It felt good.
Like, was it weird for you?
Not really. I mean, I worked at Ranchero when so I've had some sort of counseling experience, and it felt good. Just getting all that stuff off my chest, stuff that I thought I had dealt with, like my friend's suicide, and just the amount of calls that you go on. It was funny earlier. Sam was talking about, when you get home, having to decompress. I feel sometimes bad for my kids because I had this thing. It's called the milk test. If I sit down for supper after a shift and my son spills milk, and I'm like, "Hey, you know what, buddy? Be a little more careful. Can you wipe that up?" I know it's been a good day, but if I start yelling and screaming and "What's the matter with you?" Pay attention, then I know it's been a bad day.
How do you explain that to kids? How do you explain the pressures of the job without, going into too much detail of what the kind of things that you're seeing on a daily basis? Or maybe you do, I don't know.
No, I never. I tell my kids that, you know what? I see stuff at work that you shouldn't. And sometimes that causes Dad to be grumpy, grouchy, lose my temper quicker. But yeah, I never really go into detail, but.
And what's their response? Most
of the time they're kind of understanding. Depends Depends how bad, how angry Dad was, and I wish now I tell them, listen, if you notice Dad acting like that, say, hey, Dad, I think you're upset about something else. You're not really mad at me for this.
Have they done that to you?
Yeah and no.
It's hard getting called out on by your kids.
It is. It is. And I mean, my wife recently did, so it's a step in the right direction.
But I think knowing that underneath it all, there's just that immense proudness for what they see you guys doing. It's, our kids are proud of what our parents are doing in the community and supporting them.
I want to, we do have Alice and Dustin on the line right now, too. Alice is a paramedic, and Dustin has been very involved with Sask Search and Rescue. Dustin, I don't know if people really think about the mental health toll on search and rescue workers because again, you said that they might be working in a daycare or they might be working, at a shop, and then they just get called, and all of a sudden, this is your reality for the next 24, 48 hours a week. What kind of supports are available to help those folks through that?
When we go on a call, obviously that takes the priority until the call has been resolved. But afterwards, all of our teams, we have various chapters around the province, and everyone does their own debrief within their chapters. But then provincially, our leaders check in with individual chapters to see if anyone is struggling or does need to chat. You had mentioned earlier, I think it was Todd mentioned about stigma, and that's definitely the younger members that are coming into our organization, and I'm sure the others around the table, mental health is more forefront. They're more aware of it. They're more aware that there are supports out there. They're more aware that, it's not a bad thing to reach out for help. But the more experienced or wiser or older, however you want to describe them, that have lived through a time when mental health wasn't that forefront, that's where the stigma's there, and to actually put your hand up and say, I need help, is incredibly difficult. And that's where, I worry about our responders as well as the others around the table, is the fact that
are they afraid that they won't get called back if they say that this is, really challenging for them?
No, I don't think it's necessarily like a recall factor. It's more self-identifying when you need to put your hand up. And because my generation lived through a time when mental health wasn't thought of, as an illness. And to be able to identify that trigger, like, I truly need help, you just bury it and move on with your life. And that's the part that concerns me, is making sure people understand that it is not a bad thing. It's just like your heart health. It is part of your body, and your mental health is critical. So you need to reach out for help and use the resources available.
Alice, in the intro, I'd said that you train peers on suicide awareness and prevention, but the numbers aren't the same for first responders and the general public when it comes to suicide.
No, they are not. Yeah, they're an exponential, and those individuals who do data studies, looking at the percentages there. For an example, there is some recent studies showing that we have upwards of 19 to 21% first responders that have a higher prevalence to suicide ideation, plans, and or committing suicide than the general population of 3.5%.
That's a shocking number.
It's huge. And it's understanding why are we at that high level? Well, look at what we are going to on a daily basis, right? We don't go into these calls knowing, or not knowing rather, that we know we're going to see something that might be quite horrific, might be quite traumatic, right? So how do we combat that? How do we pay attention to the effects of that on our first responders, no matter what they're doing? Well, we try to educate, and we try to bring that awareness and coping skills necessary to deal with this. Education, prevention, right? One of that is, yes, the assisting individuals in suicide awareness intervention skills there. We deal with this, and we train people in this on a regular basis. But not only that, it's in conjunction with a lot of other training. My whole point is, how do we educate our first responders? How do we prepare them to help mitigate and find those healthy coping skills that when they are faced with these type of calls, these types of scenarios, what can they do for themselves? And we ask people to do the hardest thing possible, and that's putting themselves first, because we live in a world of think of others before yourself and look at our jobs.
I'm just wondering about your particular job and where those conversations happen, because we hear that maybe they happen in the fire hall, when they come back and there's some time in between. What is the in between when you're a paramedic? Are you going right from call to call, or do you have it built in? Because I can't imagine a single person who wouldn't be helped by seeing a regular therapist. But what percentage are actually seeing people?
So what we have, and Todd spoke to this a little bit earlier, is the peer support program. We have been trying to build this all throughout the province. Obviously, I'm specifically dealing with the paramedics and medical first responders, but knowing that my counterparts also have this built in. Our goal, and what we have here currently, are peer supporters on each shift. That if an individual has had a really crappy call, all of our supervisors and relief supervisors are all also aware of this, some trained in it as well. They can pinpoint an individual that can go and talk to that crew. Or they can call some of us that are off. Again, peer support is based off a volunteer basis as well, because that's the best way for this to work. So they can reach out to us. There is plastered all over our stations are the names of individuals on peer support teams, their phone numbers to contact them, right? We also go so far as to, in our orientation, we do a full presentation on peer support and how do they access that. Not only that, maybe you don't want to talk to somebody in your own house. You want to talk to somebody outside of the house. So we make sure those numbers and resources are available. But the strength comes from the peer aspect, because nobody gets it the same as someone else who has lived it.
I want to talk about a little bit about that, because Todd was talking about earlier how, maybe back in the day, you would go out for drinks after and whatever, the session ends when the bottle's empty. I don't think anybody now thinks that alcohol is like the solution to people's problems, but at the same time, it was a time built in where you were out, socializing, you were talking with those people. And I don't know if the culture is the same. Like, Sam, what do you see now when it comes to, people socializing outside of work, and are those conversations happening?
I would say yes, they are. Again, I think it kind of depends, because when I got into the RCMP, there was starting to be this huge switch from what Todd was talking about to really doing the volunteer or the peer support kind of stuff, right? So although I think there's still some culture in that, I think there's been leaps and bounds in regards to more openness to those mental health conversations. I personally can say that in a lot of social settings now, alcohol isn't as big of a thing anymore. There's still a lot of gatherings, but alcohol just isn't part of that mix. And I think people have really started to realize that it's a bit of a coping mechanism rather than actually dealing with whatever that issue is.
Do people meet up on like the pickleball courts? I don't know.
Almost, kind of. They go for walks together and look for more active things to do.
We're coming up to the end of the show. I don't like leaving on doom and gloom. I want, there's also people listening right now who have got kids that are thinking about what they're going to do for their career. Maybe they have family members, their dad's a firefighter. They're thinking about, do I want to do that? So what's your message for young people right now who are thinking about getting into a career as a first responder? I'm going to go around the horn real quick here. So, Shaylee.
Set a plan, a preventative plan for your mental health. Know that you will be impacted. It's a normal response to regular things that you see. And what can we put into place for those supports?
Sam.
Oh, man, I have to follow up after that. I guess just make sure that it's okay not to be okay, and know where to go for those resources.
Like Shaylee and Sam said, you are going to be affected. Whether you think you're the toughest, biggest, strongest, you will be affected. So make sure you know what those resources are, and make sure you know who the peer supporters are around you, because they've lived it and they'll be able to help you.
Alice?
Yeah, I'll eliminate what everybody else said, but I'm also going to point out that you got into this industry and you have the knowledge, you have the education, you do know what you're doing, and you have a hell of a lot of individuals who are behind you, both professionally and personally.
And Dustin, last word to you.
I think emergency services in any capacity can be incredibly rewarding, and times are changing. The supports are there. It's okay not to be okay. And you should get into the career and enjoy as much of it as you possibly can, because it can be very nice helping other people.
Well, we've learned a lot today. I appreciate everybody for joining this conversation. I've been speaking with Alice Gabriel, EMS paramedic in Regina, Dustin Brers, a media liaison with Search and Rescue, Sask Association of Volunteers. I was speaking with Shaylee Spencer, Sam Gersmar, and Todd Fry. You'll be able to see this conversation later on the CBC YouTube page. That is all the time we have for today. I'm Nicole Hack, and for many years I've been the producer of Blue Sky. For the last 3.5 months I've been filling in as Blue Sky host while Alicia Grabinski has been doing another job. I've enjoyed these conversations we've had over these last few months, and I'm grateful to have been able to get some new skills. So tomorrow I'll be back producing the show, answering those phones when you call in. Alicia Grabinski will be back in the host chair, and she's going to have a conversation about the future of the federal NDP. Thanks for listening.